So quoting is when you're using the exact words or lines of a source and surrounding these direct borrowings of text with quotation marks, as in, quote, to be or not to be, unquote, which is, of course, from Hamlet. Summarizing is giving the shortened version of a book, article, or piece of text. And generally, when you're summarizing, you're paraphrasing and giving that condensed version. But a lot of times, summary will also include a brief quote, maybe several brief quotes, or it might be 2-line quotes. It all depends on what you need to do. So summarizing is that part of the process that will incorporate quoting and paraphrasing too. And I can't stress too much that whether you're summarizing something, paraphrasing it, or quoting it, or some combination of all of it, you always cite your source. Some people think, oh, I didn't quote it, therefore I don't need to cite. You should cite for quotes, you should cite for paraphrase, and you should cite for summary. And as long as you do that, then you're protecting yourself against charges of plagiarism. So in a classroom setting, you might have to do, a lot of summary and responding and paraphrasing and such. Sometimes summary and response are combined into one assignment. Your instructor may ask you to write an essay about a certain work and to include your reactions. In fact, that's what we're doing for English 111, isn't it, Kyle? I know that most of you know this, but it's important to look and realize that summary and response are not the same two. They're not synonymous. They're not the same thing. Summary is just giving a condensed version of something. And it'd be in your words, but you're just giving kind of an overview in either paragraph or 2 or 3 line form or maybe a page form. And responding, generally summary is done objectively. You're in kind of an objective frame of mind, objective tone. Whereas response is subjective. You're giving your personal feelings. So we need to look at that a little bit closer, the difference between summarizing and responding. Most of the time we should be in objective tone when we're summarizing. Because summarizing, we're giving a condensed account, a shortened version of somebody else's ideas or, their plan or whatever it might be that we saw in the article. And being objective and using objective tone means you're not giving your opinion. You're not interjecting your feelings, reactions, arguments. You're just presenting what the writer of the article thinks. You're merely presenting the ideas from your source without making comments on these. And that's where, remember the author tag, Shakespeare continues, Poe points out, Steinbeck describes. That's another good use for those author tags. They help you, they help remind the reader that's reading your work that, oh, I'm just talking about Poe's ideas here. This is what Poe said. And so that helps you maintain that objectivity and that little distance between making, so that it doesn't sound like you're making statements yourself. We have blind justice there. Now, subjective tone gets into our feelings, our emotions. And when somebody wants response, that's what they want. They want, what do you think of it? How do you feel about that? They want your reactions, your personal arguments associated with a subject. They might want you to include your interpretation. So personal comments about it are wanted when you're giving response. And often you may do both of these at the same time, and that's fine. But it all depends on what's wanted, what's your instructor calling for. And some of these finer points about when you're giving subjective opinions and maintaining objectivity might be embedded in one of those essay questions you might come across. Is the essay question asking for me to defend something? it's asking for me to defend something, they want my response and interpretation in a kind of a opinionated way. For me to say, well, I think it should be this way, and then here's why. So research papers should be a blend of summary, quote, and paraphrase as you incorporate the facts and ideas from your sources into your written discussion or your oral presentation, whatever it might be. Now, to avoid charges of plagiarism, you don't want to have somebody say, well, you're stealing my ideas, or it's unethical to not use appropriate documentation when you're writing research. And so you want to avoid any charges of plagiarism by citing your source appropriately. And you cite a source appropriately for paraphrase, summary, or quote. And I know I've said this 4 times, but it's important. So it's crucial that I do repeat it. And like I said, this particular presentation is not covering MLA or APA, because all of these things I've told you today would be applicable or appropriate to any documentation styles, just general good rules of thumb for research. But you would want to avoid plagiarism, unethical and illegal use of another's words and or ideas by citing the sources correctly whenever you summarize, paraphrase, or quote. And there's 5 times I've said that, isn't it? So there's no way there can be any ambiguity. Use quotation marks whenever you borrow, even if it's 3 words in a row. You borrow half lines or whatever from your source. And use parenthetical citations in your paper. Parenthetical citations, just kind of a fancy term that means mention your source in parentheses. So when your instructors start asking you about and giving you instructions for writing papers, they may mention this stuff, they may not. But some of them might say, well, make sure that you document correctly, and I want you to use MLA. And that means the responsibility of finding out how to do that, because that's a lot said with use MLA and do it right. Whoa, what book should I start with? So there are a lot of upcoming workshops on a revolving basis on APA and MLA documentation. But parenthetical citations or in-text cites or parenthetical references, all of those are talking about the same thing, meaning in the text of your paper, in your paragraphs, after quotes, after paraphrases and summaries, you put author and page numbers for MLA. You also have to add things like the year date for APA. But you can't just go by that. You got to get into the sources for documentation styles and look at the details. But most research covers those 2 basic parts, the citations in text, and then you have a comprehensive list of your sources in correct format.